The scalding dark roast espresso shattered the quiet ambiance of Café Royale, splashing violently across the pristine pearl-white fabric of a bespoke silk blazer. "My God!" Isabella shrieked, her heavy wooden chair scraping harshly against the polished marble floor. She shot up, her manicured hands hovering over the blooming brown stain on her chest, her breathing shallow and erratic. "Are you entirely blind? Do you have any concept of what you just destroyed?" Leo froze, the empty silver serving tray trembling in his hands. He swallowed hard, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the serving table to steady himself. I am so sorry, ma'am. The gentleman behind me bumped my shoulder." "I don't care about your pathetic excuses," Isabella spat, her voice slicing through the sudden, suffocating silence of the high-end Manhattan coffee shop. She dabbed frantically at the ruined silk with a cloth napkin, her cold blue eyes flashing with absolute venom. "This is an exclusive prototype for my upcoming spring collection, a masterpiece you couldn't afford if you scrubbed floors here for the rest of your miserable life." Leo's gaze dropped to the ruined garment. His initial panic slowly faded, replaced by an involuntary, intense focus. He reached into his apron, his fingers brushing against the small, worn sketchbook he always kept on him. He stepped forward, his voice losing its tremor and gaining a quiet confidence. "The stain is terrible, yes, but the bias cut on that left lapel was already pulling. The tension was completely off. The coffee just made the thread warping visible." Isabella's jaw locked. She lowered the napkin, staring at the young waiter as if he had just spoken in tongues. She let out a dry, mocking laugh, her posture rigid with indignation. "Excuse me? You pour boiling sludge on my design, and now you, a peasant in a stained apron, are critiquing my tailoring?" Leo did not flinch. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small travel sewing kit. He met her furious gaze, his eyes calm and challenging. "If you walk out of here like that, the paparazzi will photograph a ruin. But if you give me exactly 3 minutes, I can drape that excess fabric, pin it back, and turn that stain into an asymmetrical shadow dye effect. It won't be a mistake anymore. It will be a statement." Isabella hesitated. Her eyes darted toward the cafe window where a street photographer was already hovering. She sneered, aggressively shrugging off the blazer and tossing it onto the table. 3 minutes. If you humiliate me further, I will personally ensure you never work in this city again." The rhythmic hum of machines echoed through the cavernous, glass-walled studio of Isabella Vogue. The Manhattan skyline loomed outside, but Leo's attention was entirely consumed by the mannequin in front of him. Isabella marched into the room, the sharp clacking of her stilettos acting as a warning bell for her overworked assistants, who immediately scattered. She stopped behind Leo, crossing her arms tightly across her chest as she scrutinized the reconstructed silk blazer. "You altered the collar," Isabella noted, her tone clipped, desperately trying to mask her begrudging awe. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing at the intricate cross-stitching that now adorned the lapel. "I told you to fix the stain, Leo, not to redesign my entire silhouette." Leo stepped back, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He gestured toward the garment, his voice carrying a quiet but unyielding passion. "The original silhouette was fighting the natural drape of the silk. By loosening the collar and adding the cross-stitch, the fabric breathes. It moves with the wearer, rather than constraining them. Fashion shouldn't be a cage, Isabella. It should be an extension of the soul." Isabella let out a sharp, dismissive exhale. She walked around the mannequin, her fingers tracing the hem with predatory precision. "Soul doesn't sell, Leo. Status sells. Labels sell. You are a barista who got lucky with a needle. Do not confuse your little parlor trick with high fashion." She turned to face him, her expression hardening into a mask of pure authority. "I am submitting this piece as the finale for Fashion Week, under my name, of course." Leo's heart sank, his chest tightening as the reality of her words washed over him. He stepped forward, his voice trembling with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. "But I rebuilt that jacket from scratch. The structural design, the embroidery, that is entirely my work. You can't just take it." I can and I will, Leo replied, her voice dangerously low, dripping with superiority. She stepped directly into his personal space, her eyes cold and unblinking. I gave you an opportunity to touch greatness. You are an employee, a ghost. If you ever breathe a word of this to the press, I will crush you. 2 weeks later, the backstage of New York Fashion Week was a hurricane of frantic models, blinding flashbulbs, and screaming coordinators. Leo stood in the shadows near the curtain, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Isabella stood at the center of the chaos, beaming as she adjusted the reconstructed silk blazer on her lead model. Julian, the industry's most notoriously ruthless fashion critic, approached her, a microphone clutched in his hand.
"Isabella, darling," Julian purred, his eyes raking over the blazer with undeniable hunger. "This piece is a revelation. The asymmetrical draping is breathtaking. But tell me about this stitching on the collar. It looks like a rare 18th century Venetian technique. What inspired you to use it?" Isabella froze. A micro-expression of sheer panic flickered across her perfectly contoured face. She cleared her throat, forcing a stiff, unconvincing smile. "Oh, well, you know me, Julian. I am always experimenting. It is just a little technique I came up with to add texture." Julian raised a meticulously groomed eyebrow, leaning in closer. "Just a little technique, Isabella? This is a reverse tension French knot. It requires a mathematical understanding of fabric weighting. You don't just come up with it." Leo stepped out from the shadows. The glaring backstage lights hid his face, but he didn't blink. He walked straight toward the camera crew, his posture straight, his voice echoing clearly over the backstage din. "She doesn't know the technique, Julian, because she didn't sew it." Isabella spun around, her face draining of color. She lunged forward, grabbing Leo's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into his skin. "Security," she hissed, her voice cracking with desperation. "Get this lunatic out of here!" Julian waved the security guards away, his eyes fixed on Leo with predatory curiosity. "Let the boy speak." Leo gently but firmly detached Isabella's grip from his arm. He looked directly at Julian, his voice calm, rooted in undeniable truth. "The technique is actually a modified Japanese sashiko stitch, blended with a Venetian knot to secure the bias cut without restricting the silk. If you check the inner left lining, you will find a small embroidered L, my initial. I rebuilt that jacket after I spilled coffee on her original structurally flawed prototype." Julian gasped, his eyes darting to the model. He reached out and flipped the inner left lining of the blazer. There, stitched in delicate golden thread, was the letter L. Isabella stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. The flashbulbs erupted in a blinding, aggressive frenzy, capturing every second of her spectacular downfall. 5 years later, the afternoon sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Leonard, the most exclusive and celebrated fashion boutique in Paris. The ambiance was serene, smelling of fresh lilies and rich textiles. Leo stood in front of a three-way mirror, carefully adjusting the hem of an emerald green evening gown on a high-profile client. His movements were fluid, masterful, and brimming with the quiet confidence of a man who had earned his empire. The gentle chime of the boutique's glass door echoed through the room. Leo excused himself and walked toward the entrance. He stopped. Standing near the doorway, clutching a worn leather portfolio, was Isabella. The years had not been kind. Her posture, once a rigid tower of arrogance, was hunched. The sharp, predatory glint in her eyes had been replaced by a hollow, desperate exhaustion. Her clothes, though neat, lacked the avant-garde spark she once paraded. Leo remained perfectly still. He offered a polite, professional smile, his voice warm but deeply guarded. "Isabella, it has been a long time. What can I do for you?" Isabella swallowed hard, her trembling hands clutching the portfolio tighter against her chest. She couldn't meet his gaze, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent boutique. "Leo, your store is beautiful. You've done incredible things." "Thank you," Leo replied simply, his expression giving nothing away.
He didn't step closer, letting the silence stretch between them. Isabella's lower lip quivered. She let out a ragged breath, the final remnants of her pride crumbling onto the polished floor. I lost everything, Leo. The investors pulled out after the scandal. Nobody will wear my label. Nobody will even take my calls. She took a desperate, fragile step forward. I have new sketches. I can assist. I can manage the floor. Please, Leo, I just need a second chance. Leo looked at the woman who had once tried to erase his existence for the sake of her own ego. He felt no anger, no vindictive joy, only a profound sense of closure. Karma had woven its own perfectly flawless design, leaving no loose threads. He gently shook his head, his voice soft yet ringing with absolute finality. I am sorry, Isabella, but a garment built on a rotten foundation will always unravel. I wish you the best of luck, but you cannot find your redemption here. Isabella stared at him, tears finally spilling over her lashes, ruining her makeup. She nodded slowly, the devastating reality sinking in. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the boutique, the glass door shutting quietly behind her, leaving Leo entirely in the light.